Morning YouTube. I was watching a video this morning on Fora TV, and I'll put a link to this in the information box. A video by, featuring Eve Ensler. Eve Ensler is the woman who's probably most famous for writing the Vagina Monologues, which is it's a play, but it's has achieved kind of iconic status. And there's a whole series of kind of feminist activist movements around it, and female empowerment movements around it. And the play, the Vagina Monologues, is performed kind of worldwide in whatever it is, 500 different languages now, and there's days set aside for kind of activism associated, V-days as they call them. It was a really great discussion. She was in conversation with, I can't remember his real name, but he writes under the name of Lemony Snicket, the guy who wrote a series of unfortunate events. And it was great. He's a really funny interrogator, and she's a very kind of voluble and very articulate storyteller. So it was a good discussion. It was very easy to access. But one of the things that came out from that for me, which just struck me, which is really interesting actually, is that that she clearly regards the struggle for equal rights, and it's not just equal pay rights. I mean, she's really talking about not just the objectification of women, but particularly violence against women. That's her thing about violence and abuse of women. And what she's saying is that the campaign to eliminate violence and abuse of women has primacy. It's the most important struggle, she says. And she backs up that kind of statement by saying to the effect that, according to her statistics, something like 1 in 3 women across the world will be either raped or abused at some point in their lifetime. 1 in 3, which is a shocking statistic. And what she says from that is not only does that represent a huge series of huge number of personal assaults and personal insults and personal and individual lives damaged, it also represents a massive effect on societies at large. If I can put it crassly, and she didn't put anything like as crassly as this, that's a third of the workforce is either immobilized or damaged or made fearful or made unproductive. So that's as I say, crassly speaking, a massive misuse of resources. So for those reasons and for other reasons, she says that the primary battle is the battle to eliminate violence and aggression against women, particularly sexual aggression, but not exclusively, and things like trafficking and so on. The reason why that stuck out for me is I watched a video yesterday, a YouTube video by Bark Lord, about his experience as a liberal man trying to operate as a liberal man. And he expressed a frustration which I've certainly felt at various times in my life, and I'm sure it's pretty much a common one amongst men who consider themselves to be liberal, which is... and it's it's self-centered and egotistical. I'll say that right from the start, but nevertheless it's felt, which is you do your best and you try to help the women get along and all this kind of very patronising stuff, and what do you get? Either in the anecdote that Bark Lord told, the woman that you're trying to support is not prepared to support herself. She's not prepared to stand up for herself, or it's not appreciated in some way. And I've certainly had those feelings, and I know it's kind of stupid to have those feelings, but you can't help it occasionally. You just have to kind of get over yourself, don't you, really? Because why on earth should we be appreciated for doing what's right? But there you go. But anyway, in this thing that Bark Lord was saying really reminded me. Sorry, this is a whole series of stories we'll have to do, isn't it? Anyway, this video that Bark Lord made really reminded me of similar experience I had, particularly in the 1980s. In the 1980s, I was quite involved in kind of leftist politics. I was pretty much a kind of unreconstructed Marxist at the time, and in some ways still am. A lot of, involved in the Anti-Nazi League, which was something that was going around at the time. A lot involved in nuclear disarmament. In a lot of liberal politics. Of one sort or another, but I was also involved in the fledgling men's movement at the time, which sounds a bit anachronistic, that fledgling men's movement, which was basically a men's group. We'd meet once a week and we'd either actively sort things out to do, so we used to run a creche support group, so we'd run creches alongside women's meetings so they could look after the kids while the women's were doing their thing. but also a kind of talking shop to talk about things like pornography or the militarization of the male imagination or power, all those kind of issues. We would find ways to talk about those things in all kinds of different ways, really. And it was very interesting. But one of the things that came out of that whole raft of activities I was involved in the 1980s was this very thing about primacy. Because certainly amongst a lot of particularly hardcore Marxists and hardcore communists, it was the feminist agenda, if you like, was very much secondary. The key thing was, as kind of Barclay was kind of hinting at in his video yesterday, the key thing is let's sort out the economics first. Let's sort out the economy. Let's get the workers, crudely speaking, let's get the workers in charge of the means of production. Let's get society straight. And when that happens, then we'll sort out the male-female thing. The implication being that the whole male-female inequality and kind of set of abuse cycles that come out of that inequality, that whole thing was a result of inequalities in the economy. And I think that's what Barclay was saying. Following classic Marxist principles, the economy drives everything else. So you sort the economy out, and then the male-female thing, and the black-white thing, and the gay-straight thing, and all those other debates will sort themselves out once everyone's got themselves right with the economy. And that's in close completely the opposite of what Eve Ensler is saying, which is, before we do anything else, let's get the male-female thing sorted out, and the effect will cascade into other aspects of human relations, including presumably the economic relations. Yeah, I don't know what I think about that, really. I mean, part of me thinks, is this just a stupid battle for primacy? Why would one be primary? Aren't we dealing with a network of different discourses, a network of different inequalities and things? So why do we need to talk about primacy? That's my first thought in relation to that. Isn't it? Don't we all need to be a bit more multivalent about that and deal with these things simultaneously? And the other thing I'm thinking about, this is much more speculative, is what's the connection between these things? Is there a connection between these things? And the only thing I can think of, and as I said, this is pure speculation and probably arrant stupidity, but I do wonder, how different the world would be if men, particularly, and I can feel this myself, if men weren't driven, largely by their gonads, I would have to say, if men weren't driven to be successful by why men didn't feel it was necessary to be successful in order to be sexy. And I think we do. You know what I mean? I think there's a lot of sexuality, male sexuality, tied up in being what I've heard referred to elsewhere as a success object. And it's still, it's not an unfounded feeling. It's still, as I read somewhere recently, the best marker of the income of a man is the attractiveness of his wife. You can judge the income of a man by looking at the attractiveness of his wife, and the reverse is true. You can guess at the attractiveness of a woman by looking at the income of her husband. It's not a pleasant truth, but nevertheless, apparently it stacks up. And I'm just thinking how much the world would change, not just in terms of male-female relationships, but also in terms of economic relationships, if that simple fact wasn't true. It would make such a difference, I think, both in terms of male-female relations and in terms of economic relations, if men didn't feel it was necessary to be rich and powerful in order to attract beautiful women, or women they thought to be beautiful, and if women didn't think it was necessary to be pencil thin and have pneumatic breasts and inflated lips and botoxed foreheads in order to attract rich, powerful men. Or if just we weren't attracted to each other in quite that way, really. It'd be far more interesting if we were attracted to each other in different ways. Anyway, that's all I've got to say. Thanks very much.